You won't believe what happened when our neighborhood's homeowners association tried to evict my aunt from a piece of land she actually owns. Yes, you heard that right. They tried to throw her out of her own property. For as long as I can remember, my aunt has been the kind of woman who minds her own business. She's gentle, kind, and always smiling at everyone who walks past her gate. Her house sits on a quiet corner with roses that she's tended for nearly 40 years. The air around her home always smells like peace, like time itself slows down when you visit her. But that peace didn't last forever. One morning, she received a letter, thick paper, official-looking, with bold letters at the top, Notice of Violation. She thought it must have been some mistake. After all, she pays her taxes, keeps her yard neat, and never causes trouble. But when she read the letter, her hands began to tremble. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. The HOA, the same association she'd been paying fees to for decades, was now demanding that she vacate the property because they claim she was occupying land that belonged to the association. Imagine that for a moment. A woman who had watched this neighborhood grow from dirt roads to driveways, who knew every tree, every child that played outside, being told she didn't belong. She sat quietly for a long time that day. I remember the way she looked when I visited her. Her eyes were watery, her lips trembling, the letter still open on the kitchen table. The kettle on the stove had gone cold. "They say this isn't my land," she whispered, her voice breaking. That moment broke something inside me, too, because my aunt isn't just anyone. She's the one who used to bake cookies for every new neighbor. She helped mow lawns when people were sick. She's the reason half the flowers in that neighborhood even bloom, because she planted most of them herself before there was ever an HOA. And now, those same people, the same board she helped raise funds for, were trying to throw her out. But here's what they didn't know. My aunt wasn't just the owner of her little home. She owned the very land their HOA office was built on. Yes, you heard that right. The land beneath their fancy little building, the place they held meetings and sent out rules from, was hers. It all started back in the late 1970s, before the HOA even existed. The original developer of the neighborhood had sold off parcels of land, and my aunt, being young and smart, had bought not one but two, one for her house and one empty plot beside it. Years later, when the HOA was formed, they built their office on that second lot, assuming it was public land. My aunt never said a word. She watched them build, smiled when they invited her to the opening, and even brought cookies for the celebration. She thought, "Why make trouble? Let them use it. It's just land." But decades later, that kindness was about to turn into her greatest weapon. When I found out what they were doing, I told her, "Aunt May, we need to fight this. You can't let them bully you." She looked at me calm as ever and said, "Child, I'm not angry. I just want them to remember where they stand." And that's when she showed me the old deed, the paper yellowed by time, but the words still clear. Lot 14A, registered under Mary Thompson. That was the same lot number listed on the HOA's office address. I stared at her, my jaw dropping. "You mean you own their office land?" She smiled, that soft, wise smile only older people have. "I do, dear, and I think it's time they remember that." She called her lawyer the next day. The lawyer nearly laughed in disbelief when he saw the paperwork. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, They're trying to evict you while sitting in an office that technically belongs to you. This might be one of the most ridiculous cases I've ever seen. The next HOA meeting was one for the ages. My aunt, quiet and graceful as always, walked into that room holding her papers. The same board members who had signed the eviction notice went silent when they saw her. She sat down, placed the old deed on the table, and said in her gentle tone, "I think you may want to review your property maps again. No yelling. No threats, just calm power." The president of the HOA looked nervous. He fumbled with his papers, glanced at the others, and then at my aunt. "Mrs. Thompson," he stammered, "there must be some misunderstanding." She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "there is. You thought this land was yours. But it never was." The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. One of the younger board members tried to speak, but her lawyer raised his hand. "My client has been generous enough to let you use her land for years. But if this is how you repay her, we may need to reconsider that arrangement." That was the moment the HOA members realized just how deep they had stepped into trouble. My aunt didn't want revenge. She wasn't that kind of person. She just wanted respect, the kind of respect she'd always given others. And that day, she got it. They withdrew the eviction notice immediately. In fact, they sent her a letter of apology signed by every board member. They even offered to pay her rent for the land moving forward. But Aunt May, she smiled and said, "No rent." Just kindness. That's who she was. And yet, that wasn't the end of the story. Because what happened next changed the entire neighborhood forever. When the HOA meeting ended that day, everyone thought the matter was over. They had apologized, withdrawn the eviction, and promised to never bother my aunt again. But what they didn't know was that my aunt, sweet, calm, and gentle Aunt May, had already started planning her next move. She told me that night as we sat on her porch under the old oak tree. The evening breeze was soft, and the smell of rain drifted in the air. She held her cup of tea, eyes fixed on the sunset. "Child," she said, "sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way, not out of anger, but so they remember to never forget kindness again." Her words carried the kind of weight that only time can teach. She knew that if she simply forgave them, the HOA might go back to their old ways one day. They might pick on someone else, another elderly neighbor who couldn't fight back. My aunt had seen it happen too many times. They'd bullied an old man down the street for leaving his garbage can out too long. They'd fined a widow for planting sunflowers that didn't fit community color standards. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was about protecting others too. So, she did something nobody expected. She called her lawyer again. "I've made up my mind," she said calmly. "I want to do something good with that land." A week later, the HOA received an official notice, this time from her. The same board that once threatened to evict her now opened an envelope with trembling hands. The letter stated that, effective immediately, the HOA's office land was being reclaimed by its rightful owner, Mrs. Mary Thompson. The letter also mentioned that she was offering them a 90-day period to vacate the property or negotiate a fair lease if they wished to stay. Panic spread through the HOA like wildfire. Their president, Mr. Collins, tried to act confident in front of others, but everyone knew he was sweating bullets. Without that office, the HOA had nowhere to operate. Their records, their meetings, their storage, everything was inside that building. One of the board members, a woman named Linda, showed up at my aunt's house the next morning. She was polite but clearly nervous. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, I'm sure we can find some understanding. We didn't mean to offend you, my aunt smiled, offering her a cup of tea. Offend me? She said gently. You tried to throw me out of my home, dear. That's not offense. That's disrespect. Linda lowered her eyes. My aunt continued, but don't worry. I'm not angry. I just want to make sure you treat everyone here with fairness, not just me. That's my only condition if you want to stay. Linda looked up, surprised. You mean, we can stay? Aunt May nodded. You can stay, but from now on, things will be different. And they were. She asked her lawyer to draw up a new agreement, one that clearly stated her ownership of the land and allowed the HOA to use it for free, as long as they operated with integrity and fairness toward every resident. The agreement even included a clause that said if the HOA ever attempted to mistreat or wrongfully fine a resident again, their right to the office would be immediately revoked. It was simple, powerful, and poetic justice. When the HOA signed that document, the entire board looked humbled. They'd gone from trying to evict her to asking for her permission to keep their office. And the best part? My aunt didn't gloat. She didn't brag. She simply went back to watering her roses, humming softly like she always did. But something changed after that day. Word spread through the entire neighborhood about what she did, how she handled it with grace and strength. People began stopping by her house just to talk, to thank her, to bring her pies and flowers. The same neighbors who once whispered about HOA rules now gathered around her fence, laughing and sharing stories. She became a kind of quiet legend in the community. Old Mr. Jenkins, who'd been fined 3 times for his messy garage, came by one afternoon. He tipped his hat and said, "Mrs. Thompson, you didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us." Her eyes softened. "Well," she said with a small smile, "someone had to remind them that rules mean nothing without respect." From that day on, the HOA changed how it worked. They started listening to residents instead of lecturing them. They created a committee where older homeowners could share their opinions before new rules were made. And they even planted a small garden outside their office, the office still standing on her land, with a sign that read, "Thompson Garden, in honor of the woman who taught us fairness." It brought tears to my eyes the first time I saw it. My aunt never asked for recognition, but they gave it to her anyway. Still, even with all the peace that followed, something else was happening quietly. My aunt had started to think about what would happen after she was gone. "Child," she told me one night, "this land doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to the people who live here, to the community that's finally learning what it means to be kind." I asked her what she meant. She smiled but didn't answer. It wasn't until months later that I found out what she was planning. And when I did, I couldn't believe how far her kindness went, because Aunt May wasn't just going to forgive them. She was about to give them something that would change their lives forever. A few months after everything settled down, my aunt started spending more time in her garden. She said it helped her think. The roses were blooming brighter than ever that summer, their scent drifting through the neighborhood like a quiet reminder of peace. But behind her calm smile, something was changing. She had made a decision, one that would surprise everyone. I remember sitting with her on the porch one evening. The sky was painted in soft orange light, and the crickets were singing. She looked at me, her eyes filled with that familiar wisdom, and said, "Child, I've seen enough of life to know one thing. Land and money mean nothing if they can't bring peace." I nodded, not sure where she was going with this. she continued. Do you remember when they tried to evict me? Of course, Aunt May. How could I forget? She smiled gently. Well, I don't want to leave this world carrying bitterness. I want to leave something better behind. The next day, she called her lawyer again. Everyone in town knew that whenever she called him, something big was about to happen. A week later, she invited the HOA board and several neighbors to her home. There was a long wooden table set up in her yard, covered with her favorite lace cloth and fresh flowers from her garden. She served tea, biscuits, and that famous lemon cake everyone loved. When everyone was seated, she stood up slowly, her back straight, her voice calm. I've called you all here because I have an announcement, she said. I've decided what to do with the land, the one under your office. The room fell silent. You could hear the wind rustling the leaves. Mr. Collins, the HOA president, looked uneasy. Mrs. Thompson, he began, we want you to know how grateful we are for your kindness. You've been more than fair to us, she nodded, her eyes soft but strong. I appreciate that. But this isn't about fairness anymore. It's about doing what's right. She handed her lawyer a small folder. He opened it, and inside were papers, official documents stamped and signed. My aunt smiled and said, I'm donating the land to the neighborhood. It will no longer belong to me nor to the HOA alone. It will belong to everyone as a community trust. The crowd gasped. Even the lawyer looked emotional. She continued, but there's one condition. That land must always be used for something good, a space where people can come together, learn, and help each other. If it ever becomes a place of greed or power again, the ownership reverts to my family. Tears filled my eyes. That was Aunt May, turning an act of cruelty into a lesson in grace. Linda, the board member who'd visited her months earlier, stood up and wiped her eyes. Mrs. Thompson, she said, her voice shaking, I don't know what to say. You could have taken everything from us and instead, you gave it back, my aunt smiled softly. That's because forgiveness is the only thing that makes us truly free, she said. If I can leave this world knowing people learned that here, then I've done something worth doing. Everyone clapped quietly, some with tears running down their cheeks. Mr. Collins came forward and shook her hand. You've changed how we see things, he said. You've reminded us what community really means. A few months later, the HOA office was transformed. The sign above the door now read, Thompson Community Center. Inside, there were shelves of donated books, a small room for meetings, and even a space where children could come after school to study or draw. Every Saturday, my aunt would sit by the window sipping her tea, watching people come and go from that building, her land, now alive with laughter and hope. One afternoon I asked her, Do you ever wish you had kept it, Aunt May? She chuckled softly. Oh, no, dear. I've kept what matters. Look at them, talking, smiling, helping one another. That's more valuable than any title deed. The years passed, and time, as it always does, moved gently on. The neighborhood grew older, just like its people. But the story of what my aunt did never faded. Parents told their children, and the children told theirs. When my aunt passed away peacefully at the age of 88, the whole neighborhood came to her funeral. There were flowers everywhere, white lilies, yellow roses, and pink carnations from the very garden she loved. And right in front of the Thompson Community Center, they placed a new sign that said, In memory of Mary Thompson, the woman who turned anger into kindness and land into love. That day, I realized something beautiful. True power doesn't come from owning land or winning arguments. It comes from forgiveness. from standing tall without crushing others, from knowing that sometimes grace can win where force never could. And if you ever pass through that neighborhood today, you'll still see her spirit there, in the flowers, in the smiles, and in the quiet peace that only a kind heart can leave behind. CTA, end of section 3, final message. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes kindness is weakness, and remind them that grace is the greatest strength we have. Because in the end, it's not about winning the fight, it's about healing the world around us.